Right, welcome to Pleasure and Emotions. We're going to share the screen here so that you can see my presentation. We had Steve and I had a little conversation today about that. Oh, I have my little face in the corner. I'm gonna just actually, let's see if I can turn off my video. I can, good. Okay, so now you can just see my screen. And I'll pop in if there's more I want to say. So welcome to Pleasure and Emotions. This is all about why your emotions and what's between your ears, meaning your brain, are the key to feeling more pleasure and turn on. First, starting with a land acknowledgement. So today's class is coming to you from my home where I live and work on the territories of the Nehiyawak and the Anishinaabeg. I'm getting that down. Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis and Michif Nation. My home and studio are on Treaty 4 lands. Today, we're going to be covering what is anhedonia. So this is maybe a term that you haven't heard. You've probably heard of hedonism, and anhedonia is the absence of pleasure. And we'll talk quite a lot about anhedonia. We're going to talk about why your brain is the most important sex organ. So we'll talk a lot about emotions and brain science. We won't get into the nitty-gritty, but enough for you to realize that managing what goes on inside your brain, enough for you to realize how important that is in managing your relationship with pleasure. We'll talk a little bit about how stress is impacting your ability to feel satisfying pleasure. This is something that I have talked about. I'm sure you've heard me talk about it. It's something I talk about a lot. And we're in the middle of, again, a global pandemic. A lot of us are experiencing higher levels of stress than we typically would. And so I think it's really important to talk about stress and to talk about strategies that help us address stress, and to know why we might not be feeling super into pleasure right now, super into having sex right now, because stress could be playing a big role in that. And then we'll talk about some steps that you can take that will help you move through help you move through stress, help you move through challenging or difficult emotions, and help you move toward feeling more sexual desire. So I know that the two of you who are watching know me well, but for anyone else, I want to share just a little bit about me. I'm Robin. I'm a sensuality coach and an embodiment guide, and I support passion-driven women to feel connected to their bodies so that they can feel alive and vibrant in and out of the bedroom. I study sexuality with Layla Martin in her year-long 600-hour sex, love, and relationship coaching program. And I really do believe that intentionality around your sexuality is key to emotional well-being. All right, let's start with, does this sound familiar? And you may recognize yourself in one or many of these scenarios or ways of being right now. So first, you're taking care of many people. So you might be taking care of children, you might be doing some caregiving for your parents, even your spouse. You may feel like you do a lot of take on a lot of the emotional labor and a lot of the physical labor in the house. You're experiencing stress due to global pandemic or for other reasons. I mean, there are many, many reasons why we experience stress. And so you might be experiencing high levels of stress right now. You might be feeling more anxious than usual these days, and that could be due to stress. That could be due to you might be someone who experiences more anxiety. And you might be spending more time than you want to on social media, or watching TV, or eating to comfort yourself, or drinking alcohol or smoking cannabis. So if you see yourself in any of these, you might also be experiencing anhedonia as a result. So anhedonia is a disruption in your capacity to feel a satisfactory amount of pleasure. And it leaves you with feeling as though something isn't right. So you feel either disconnected completely from pleasure, or just completely dissatisfied with the pleasure that you are feeling. So this is what anhedonia can look like, and you might recognize this in you. So unable to experience pleasure, or really never satisfied with the pleasure that you have. Feelings of anxiety or emotional distress. An emotional and physical lockdown that can prevent you from letting go into a pleasurable release of joy, curiosity, and adventure. So that might look like feeling kind of uptight, or feeling like you can't just surrender, and that you kind of have to control the situations. Difficulty or unable to self-regulate emotions. So if you find that your emotions kind of take over, and you suddenly find yourself completely angry, or you find yourself so stressed that you can't really cope, this is an inability to self-regulate your emotions, and stress absolutely is a big player in this. So let's talk a little bit about pleasure and pain. So pleasure is super interesting, because it is actually, as much as pain is, part of our survival network. So we actually feel both pleasure and pain as a way to protect ourselves, to survive as a species. So pleasure and pain are actually interconnected in the brain, and they function together as signals that we should pay attention to. So obviously the pain signals are something that maybe is not good for us, or not safe or dangerous. The pleasure is giving us some information that, hey, maybe this is something I should move toward. When these signals, I missed a typo there. When these signals are disrupted, or if they malfunction, we definitely end up feeling more vulnerable or more anxious. And one of the things that we tend to do a lot in our culture is we tend to avoid pain. And we tend to do things to actually avoid feeling the emotional distress of pain. And as a result, we actually end up also diluting our capacity to feel pleasure. So both of these are important. And I think what we tend to do is to actually deny ourselves pleasure. Yet pleasure is something that is biologically part of being human. So let's talk about pleasure a little bit more. So what is pleasure? So Aristotle used the word hedonia to describe pleasure, and he described it as the act of enjoyment or delight. And pleasure can take many forms. It's both, it is subjective. So what I find pleasurable might not be what you find pleasurable, and vice versa. And it can change. So something that you thought was very pleasurable at one point, you may no longer feel as pleasurable. So it's absolutely something that is dynamic. Primary pleasures. So these are the main pleasures: food, warmth, sex, and safety. And these are really fundamental because they support survival. And then the final thing about pleasure to remember is that it can be both a physical sensation, so we can feel it physically in our bodies, but it can also be a mental or emotional construct. So what anhedonia does is it disrupts the brain by interfering with the core emotions. So when we're experiencing anhedonia, which may be due to excessive stress or an imbalance of some sort, or we're just not taking care of ourselves, it may be due to trauma. There's many reasons why someone might be experiencing anhedonia. But when we're experiencing that inability to connect with pleasure or to feel pleasure, our brain is disrupted by that. And the anhedonia actually interferes with the core emotions that are generated in the bottom of the brain, in the limbic system. And so these core emotions are important in terms of the pathway to getting back to feeling pleasure. And vice versa, feeling pleasure is actually also important as a pathway to getting back to balance in our emotional systems, because these two things are very intertwined and they work together. So this is something that is new to me. It's science that I absolutely, I find it fascinating. So this is the science by Pangsep is his name. It's his last name. And these are his 7 core emotions. So you can see on the left that these are affiliate emotions on the left. So these are the emotions that that are that bond us to one another. And then on the other side are the emotions that cause us to feel distress. So the affiliate emotions, seeking. So seeking is actually really important because it actually manages and regulates all of the other emotions. So when our seeking system is out of balance, everything is impacted by that. And what one thing that if you're not feeling a lot of sexual desire, for example, that could be an imbalance in your seeking mechanism. You just don't feel like it, and so you don't seek it out. And actually just shifting in that one area could make a big impact in how you feel about pleasure. So really interesting stuff. So seeking is the enthusiastic and exuberance, feeling enthusiastic and exuberant for life. It is your motivation. So it's the thing that gets you out there and doing things. So seeking would be like, if you think about a more, a hunter-gatherer type human, the seeking would be, a part of like, okay, I have to go get food. I have to go hunt. And that would be motivated by the seeking emotion. Care. So care is beautiful. It runs on internal opioids, altruism, compassion, empathy, and love. So this is like oxytocin stuff. And care is just it's just a beautiful feeling. We know this one well. Play is so, so important. And I think this is something that, it's interesting because when I think about a lot of the tools that I use as a coach to support women to feel more connected to their sexuality, or even just to feel more connected to themselves, play is a big part of that. Really tapping into that part of yourself that is that can have fun and be curious and explore and do playful things. So this is joyful occupation. And really, this is how we learn and how we explore and experiment with ourselves, each other, and the world. So play is so important for children. And one of the interesting things that I learned while studying this is that rough and tumble play, so the kind of play that children are generally discouraged from doing, is actually some of the most important play that they'll do, and can really help them develop strong social skills later in life. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think something that's worth noting for sure. And play is not something that's just for children. It's something that's important all through life. So if you're feeling like a disconnection in some of the more distressing emotions, actually just adding more play can be a solution to feeling the imbalance in other areas. Lust. So lust is pretty self-explanatory. It's really the urge to merge. Lust is our sexual connections. And then over in these other emotions, the ones that we don't necessarily like to feel, are fear. So fear is our natural danger alarm system. When we have an overfunctioning fear system, it will manifest as chronic stress, anxiety. That is pretty common. And I think I would say that for many of us, I think, we tend to see in some places a criticism of fear, like, well, we shouldn't be afraid, like, don't be afraid. But fear is a very, very natural, very human thing to feel. And we may all be feeling that, some of us consciously and some of us unconsciously. And really, when it becomes problematic is when we're not conscious of it, right? Because it can really take control of our lives and our actions and the way that we feel. Rage is super interesting. So aggression is a form of rage. So aggression happens, in response to, hey, you're taking my food, give it back, like, and the fight to get it back, or like an animal hunting, for example, appears aggressive. And so that would be part of the rage system. But what's really interesting is that rage generally happens in response to a story that we create. So our brain sees the situation. So example, traffic is such a good example of this. We're stuck in traffic. We see a situation where like, get cut off or whatever. And then we make up a story about the person who cut us off. And then rage is a result of that. So super interesting one. Panic and grief. So panic and grief is like that feeling of abandonment or isolation. So this can really show up in people who are anxiously attached. And essentially it keeps us close to significant relationships, right? It acts up when we're not feeling close to our people. And this is something that can, we know if you've ever experienced grief, you know how that impacts the way that you feel and the way that you're coping. And then just even times where maybe you have, felt insecure in a relationship, or insecure, in many ways, with friendships, and that feeling, that kind of like uncomfortable panic feeling that you might be rejected. That is part of the panic grief system. So when any of these systems is imbalanced, what happens is, so we have three parts of the brain. We have the bottom of our brain, which are these core emotions. And then we have the mid-level of our brain, which is like our memories and our conditioning and our beliefs, the things that are kind of just underneath the surface. And the things that have happened to us make us who we are. And these sit in the middle of our brain. And then the top of our brain is our wisdom, our thoughts, the thinking that we do. So when any of the lower brain, so the bottom brain systems are imbalanced, our top brain can't function properly. And so it kind of just leaves us at the mercy of our bottom brain. So you could kind of think of like the bottom brain, like if you were to kind of flip it upside down and imagine it like an ocean or something. The bottom brain is like the waves on the ocean, and you would be like a boat being all tossed around by the waves on the ocean. But if you were able to sink deep down into the depths of the ocean and just look up at the waves, you would be operating more so from the top of your brain, and you're like, hey, I'm experiencing these waves. These emotions are taking hold of me. But I know that I don't have to respond to this. I can, so really, once we understand that our bottom brain core emotions are pretty, like, they just do what they do. And it's not always easy to control them. But once we have an awareness of that, we can start to take action and do things to help us establish a healthy and vibrant desire for sex, and honestly, a healthy and vibrant desire for living, for life. So how do we restore emotional balance? I haven't come back on. I said I would come back on and talk with the video, but I feel like this has been working so far. I'll come back on in a moment. So this is restoring emotional balance. So with restoring emotional balance, let's start with the seeking. So if you are feeling a disconnection or a dysregulation in the seeking, you don't feel up to to having adventures or doing different things, and you just want to sit on the couch and you feel unmotivated, or like like you just don't have that kind of lust for life. And again, when we're experiencing anhedonia, it is probably also very, very likely that our seeking mechanism is dysregulated in some ways, or our seeking emotion is dysregulated in some way. So in order to regulate that, we actually have to use our top brain and be like, okay, I know that this isn't going to be easy. I know that this is uncomfortable, but I'm going to make a choice to explore and try new things. So you'd actually eh, look at, okay, so let's look at like, how could I play? And, maybe I could do something more playful, or maybe I could do something that kind of triggers the lust emotion. And it's in these deliberate choices to explore and try new things, and then the biochemical reward, so the dopamine reward that we get from that, that actually causes us to seek and want more. But we have to kind of make that first choice to be like, okay, I'm going to be deliberate about this, and I'm going to try something new. And just even that one decision, that one choice can start to get things back in motion. So, I think this is, really where the value of working with therapists or working with a coach around these things can be really important, because they can say like, hey, try this, give you something, and offer you obviously accountability for doing that. For caring. So if you are someone who cares for a lot of people, then a good way to find balance, because in that, like if you're doing a lot of caring, you get dysregulated in your caring emotion, and then you may end up feeling rage, right? You may end up feeling panic or grief. You may end up feeling disconnected, and again, that will cause you to maybe not seek new experiences, or to not actually feel connected to pleasure. So what you would want to do is just ask for help. Ask someone like, hey, I really need to be taken care of, and admit that you don't have to do all the things. And on the flip side, if you find that you find yourself raging a lot, maybe it's just, saying like, I want to be cared for. I want some help. On the flip side of that too, if uh, in that rage emotion, another thing that you can do is actually care for someone. So, as you know, if you find that you are always being taken care of, maybe the way to find balance in the care emotion is to care for someone else. Play is pretty, so this one really is lightening up, letting go of control or overworking. A nice way to play is to bring a sense of adventure back into the bedroom. So try something new. Last, so something that's really interesting in long-term relationships. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to talk about this more, because this is an important thing. So lust is really interesting, but more like I want to talk a little bit more about desire. So that feeling of wanting to have sex. So in long-term relationships, like at first, when you're in a relationship, there is this, actually Nan Wise in her book calls it new relationship energy. And I'm sure if you've been, in a relationship at the beginning, it's actually pretty exciting. And we feel a lot of energy, we feel a lot of desire, we feel a lot of sexual attraction. And it actually goes above our baseline. So we all have a baseline of like, how we experience desire. And so if you kind of want to get a feel for your baseline, you have to look back to before new relationship energy, maybe when you weren't in a relationship, and think about like, well, how much did I, desire self-pleasure? Did I think about sex often? And kind of look at like, what was like my baseline, right? And if you have an idea of what your baseline is, then you'll know like your new relationship energy is absolutely going to go over and above that. And actually in that new relationship energy, women can experience more spontaneous desire. Spontaneous desire is something that mostly men experience. So they just are like ready for sex anytime. Whereas women their sort of set point around desire is more responsive. There are exceptions. There are men who experience responsive desire and women who experience spontaneous desire. And there are actually, because gender is a spectrum, right? There is, a whole spectrum of that. So, I tend to be it's hard to have this conversation and like be definitive about it, but I just want you to think about like, well, what is my experience? For me, definitely responsive desire. It's like, it's not there unless there's something like some sort of like stimulus that's like, oh yeah, actually I like having sex. And then the desire comes from that. And what's great is like you feel the pleasure and then you feel more desire. It's kind of like a cycle that circulates. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah. So the one thing to remember about lust is that for some people, lust is like just there. The desire is just there. And then for others, it's there at the beginning of relationship and then it wanes, or it's more responsive and you have to do things. You actually have to take action steps to feel more desire. And again, that's my work as a coach, is supporting my clients to take those action steps to feel more desire. All right, I'm going to go back to my share screen here. All right. So you need to determine what turns you on and make a point of doing that more. And that helps to trigger the responsive desire. When you're feeling an out of balance fear response, you could heal that or bring yourself back into balance by being intentional about playing, or being intentional about caring, or being intentional about lust. Same thing with rage. You can care for someone or allow yourself to be cared for. And then the panic and grief, asking others to care for you and looking towards play and lust. So all of these, you can see how they all work together and how they all support each other. And you can see how when these things are out of balance, how they can kind of hijack and take over, and how it's so important to just kind of be conscious, like to know, okay, I'm feeling a feeling here. How am I going to move through that feeling? And that's really where we want to go next, is emotional regulation. So one thing that I have realized in studying, in studying about sexuality and studying just about overall health and wellness, is that really the key, the one thing that we all need to do, and that we're probably not overly good at doing, is to feel our feelings. And there's many reasons why we don't feel comfortable in feeling our feelings. So you may have grown up in a family where you didn't express emotions. That was definitely the case for me. And we were pretty, would you call it, like one note in our emotions, which was like, easy going, but not a lot of anger, not a lot of sadness, not a lot of like, big emotions. So you may have grown up like that. You may have experienced trauma. And feeling your emotions is actually very, very challenging for you. It can cause a re-trigger of your trauma, or cause you to just feel very, very unsafe. If that's the case for you, then I would suggest that it's still would be important to get to the point where you are able to walk your emotions through. So what I mean by that is I like to think of Emily Nagoski's work with emotions, where she talks about how emotions are like tunnels and you have to go from one side to the other side in order to allow that emotion to fully process through. So those unprocessed emotions, those are actually things that cause like the chronic stress and the dysregulation, and that the unprocessed grief, for example, can throw everything off balance, and then can cause us to feel anhedonia. It can cause us to feel just not right. So it's important to feel your emotions, but if trauma is preventing you from doing that, then it's really, I would say, a good idea to seek the support of a therapist to help you to move into your capacity to express and feel emotions. So if you feel safe in feeling your emotions and you just don't like to feel them, these are some steps that can help you to feel your emotions. The first thing is, and this is why I think yoga is so important. Why I think that, what we do on our yoga mat, if we're really, really conscious of how we practice, and if you attend my classes, you know that I'm very conscious about being real with yourself on the mat, but to notice how emotions feel in your body. So the more that you are conscious of how your body feels, the more you can be conscious of how emotions feel in your body. What are the sensations you feel? And what's really fascinating and actually quite powerful about emotions is that when you're feeling, strong emotions, when you feel them as sensations, like for example, anxiety or anger or sadness, uh, when you actually just sit with them and feel them as sensations, it gives you a different relationship with them, because you're disconnecting from the story that you're telling yourself, the thing that's making you maybe suffer or believe things that are just causing you to feel bad. And so what you're doing is disconnecting from the story or the meaning that you're making the feeling have, and actually discharging that by just feeling the sensation of the feelings. So when I say disconnect from the story, I'm not saying disconnect from the emotion. I'm not saying that you should, or that I'm not even saying that the story isn't important or that it isn't valid. But I think you will feel a lot more empowered around your emotions if you let yourself actually just go into the sensation. And when you sit with the sensation of an emotion, and I always compare it to like doing a yin class, when you're in pigeon pose and you're like, this really is uncomfortable, but you just sit with it. And same thing with emotion. You just sit with the sensation of the emotion, and you notice that over time it shifts and moves, and it goes away, and you feel better. But you saw it through. You let your body process it through. And so it didn't get stuck. And you don't go into that kind of chronic dysregulation around the emotions, because you've actually allowed it to happen. And, we have lifestyles and social norms and all sorts of things that prevent us from doing that. But I think it's really important whenever we can, to allow ourselves to have that complete experience of emotions. And I really, really believe that if you have a practice that teaches you to feel things in your body, it's easier to do that. It's easier to feel the emotions. All right, let's go back. Sit with discomfort before distracting. So one of the things that we tend to do, and I know this is something that I would say is a growth edge for me. Sit with discomfort before distracting and self-soothing with food or with your phone or drugs or work. I tend to work. I tend to go on my phone, definitely food, maybe some wine. But I have to be really conscious and catch myself. with that. I have to be like, okay, I am like not doing this because I actually want the pleasure of it. I'm doing this to avoid something. And it's okay to have, to use your phone, to, to take drugs, to eat food and to work when it's for the purpose of feeling good and pleasure, when it's healthy hedonism, right? Like that's a positive thing. But when you're doing it to avoid feeling something, then again, you're actually not letting those emotions process through, and you could be causing yourself more distress in the long run. So just, do a little check-in. Am I doing this for pleasure, or am I doing it to avoid something? And if you feel like you're doing it to avoid something, maybe every once in a while, instead of just like mindlessly doing the thing that you do to avoid feeling, just try and feel for a moment and let yourself walk through that tunnel of emotion. And when you're sitting there, feeling the emotions, feeling the sensations, you can ask yourself, what do I need right now? What do I need? And you might find that you can actually explore something to stimulate that feeling of play. Like, oh, I really need to go and do something fun. I really need to call my friend and have a chat on the phone. Or less, like, oh, you know what? I just really need to get my vibrator out. Or self-care, like I need to eat, so I need to nourish my body, I need to drink some water, I need to have a bath. But this is the tool that if you do these things, you can really support yourself emotionally. And when you do this, then you start to become more regulated. And so those bottom brain emotions aren't going to hijack. And if you can stay in this place where it's like, oh yeah, I see this happening. I see how this is keeping me away from feeling good, feeling pleasure, and you can make choices. Another way to really have a good sense of what's going on in your body and mind and how emotions feel in your body is journaling. So journaling can help you to explore what's going on for you emotionally, and so that you can use, and so this is a really great term, operational intelligence. So this is the decision making, the action taking that you do to help you to take control of your emotions, to manage your emotions in a really positive and healthy way. So journaling, just sitting down and writing what's on your mind. One thing, when you do journal is write, how that feels in your body. One of the things I always do when I'm working with clients is when we're talking about strong emotions, we talk as much about how it feels in the body as we talk about, the actual, the perception or the thought experience of the emotion. It's like, well, how does this feel? What's actually going on in your body? So let's talk about some better sex tools. So this, I think, is one of the coolest things. So having better sex can help with emotional regulation. So you can actually focus on having a better sex life and all the other things improve. It's amazing. It's so cool. And this is something that when I read this, when I'm going to share my sources at the end of this, but the book by Nan Wise, Why Good Sex Matters. I was like, I've been saying this forever. That start with sex and everything else improves. There's actually science to show that in her practice, she saw again and again that couples who focused on having better sex, their emotional basement, their brain was better. They felt better. So fascinating. And then it works the other way. So you could focus on your brain and then you can have better sex. So my solution is do both, right? Do both. Work on emotional regulation and work on having better sex. And when you do both of those combined, you can start to shift towards what Nan calls, which I think is one of the best terms, healthy hedonism. So a healthy connection to pleasure. And again, pleasure is biological. It is something that you are wired to feel. It's not something that you have to earn. You get to feel pleasure as much as you want, and it is something that as a human being, you are wired to feel. So, active listening practices and deep emotional connection. For many women, particularly, this is like the biggest turn on. So, feeling like you're being heard. So, active listening, I'm sure you've heard of this before, but you'll say something to your partner, and your partner will repeat back to you what they heard you say, and then you can validate or you can clarify. So that's active listening, or just deep emotional connection. So having those deep soulful conversations can really help women to feel safe, so to disarm that maybe the overactive fear emotion, and relax into play or lust. If you do all of the caring, and again, I think I've probably said this about 5 times in this presentation, but I think that it's something that we need to say again. If you do all of the caring, ask to be cared for. You don't have to do it all. So important. Have a self-pleasure practice. So I know this might be like, maybe this is something that feels comfortable for you. Maybe this is something that challenges you, but I'm going to encourage you to be your own best lover first, and then you will become a better lover with your partner as well. It's just is like learn to play your own instrument, I think is what Nan says in the book, and I think that is just so true. But when we talk about responsive desire responds to pleasure. So when you feel more pleasure, you feel more desire. That's how it works. So really important to have a practice around pleasure. And then manage your stress. I had to put it here, and I think I put it on the next page. Do yoga. Just do yoga. I know that you both do yoga, and all of you who are watching this have access to yoga videos here in the community. So you can absolutely practice yoga, but I highly, highly recommend doing some yoga. And then manage your stress. So this is so important, especially now. And stress is really probably the most likely thing that is hijacking our emotional experience, always, and especially right now. And so if you've been feeling disconnected from pleasure, even to the point of saying like, well, it doesn't matter that much. I don't need it that much, because it's like we just have lost that connection. And I know I'm not saying that like I am like perfect around pleasure either. It's been a hard year. There's been a lot of stress. And I've had to be really, 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 really conscious about managing my stress by doing these things to complete stress cycles. So this is taken from Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski's book called Burnout. I think that book is required reading for all women. And if you haven't read it yet, please do read it. It's such an important book. So 15 minutes. So these are ways you can complete the stress cycle. So essentially, you're walking through the tunnel of the emotion. So you're feeling fear, you walk through the tunnel of fear to the other side when you don't feel the fear anymore. But the thing is, there are many times in social situations and experiences that we have where we actually, we can't just sit with the fear, or fight or flee or do whatever we need to do to complete the stress cycle, to walk through and feel that emotion to its end. And so then we get these incomplete stress cycles hijacking our brain and creating havoc in our lives. So and causing us to not feel the pleasure that we want to feel and desire and deserve to feel. So we should do this. We should complete stress cycles regularly. So the first way you can do this is 15 minutes of cardiovascular exercise a day. It doesn't have to be super intense. Just get your heart pumping, your body moving, your breath going. I've just included here, again, yoga, breath work, or meditation are also ways that you can complete stress cycles. A 20-second hug. It's amazing. So with a 20-second hug, there's a release of oxytocin, which of course then stimulates our care emotion and can help us feel better almost instantly. So 20-second hug, heart to heart, standing over your center of gravity, or a 6-second kiss. So it's pretty hard not to feel, it's pretty hard to kiss somebody for 6 seconds that you don't feel safe with. So that just allows your body to be like, I'm safe, I'm okay. And you can just allow the stress to dissolve. Laughter is a really, really good stress reducer, and friendly company. So friendly smiling faces. So this is something that, of course, right now, when we go out in public, and we're wearing our masks because we are doing good things and we are being good humans. But there is also the reality that when we are out wearing our masks, we only have a part of a human face to cue us into, like, am I safe or am I not safe? And laughter and friendly company is actually super important to help us to feel safe. So making sure that you find places to have friendly connections. So gathering outdoors with your friends if you can, staying within the guidelines, having Zoom calls with friends, and just making sure that you have that space to connect with other humans, especially now, because this is, again, a great way to reduce stress. And right now, that should be your priority. Absolutely. Make something. So whether you bake or you craft or you are an entrepreneur and you make programs. So for me, just sitting down and creating a slide deck like this one is like actually a way to manage stress. You start something and you complete it. And that can actually be a really powerful way to help complete a stress cycle. All right, let's talk a little bit about how I can support you. Because if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, if you're engaged with this, you're like, okay, so now how do I do this? And you can totally do it on your own. So you could read the book that I read, and that I'm going to just show the title again so you can write it down. But it's the Why Good Sex Matters by Nan Wise, or Burnout by Emily Nagoski. I have like lists upon lists upon lists of books that I'm more than happy to share with you. But like, you can do this on your own. And I'm more than happy to offer you support in terms of answering your questions inside the Radiant Life community. So just stick around here, follow me on Instagram, and you can get support for free. And you can just do a DIY version of getting help. And I am totally in support of that. I am absolutely 100% a DIYer myself. But because I'm a DIYer, I actually know all the things. I've done all the work. So you could actually learn from me too. So I want to talk a little bit about Ignite Your Desire. So Ignite Your Desire is my, I call it a self-coaching course because essentially there's journaling. So you can do deeper self-reflection, and they're actually around questions that I ask clients in coaching calls. And then you also get a practice, which is something I give to all of my coaching clients, a practice to help them to connect to their body centrally. And then also some action steps that you can take. And so it feels like a coaching experience, but you do go through it on your own. So I'm going to just come back. So the course, though, this time, because I moved it over to Mighty Networks, I'm going to use it as an opportunity to re-record all of the modules in the course, because I didn't really like the videos. So I was like, nah, I'm just going to re-record it, but I'm going to re-record it live. So It's kind of a self-coaching journey in the sense that like you're still going to be doing a lot of this. Like we won't have necessarily one-on-one time, but I am guiding the journey. So it's a little bit more like a group coaching program. So you get a little more hands-on this time. This is the only time this course is going to be like this. The price isn't going up because of it. The price is the same as what the course would cost any time that you were to take that course, whether you're doing the self-study or the guided journey with me. This is $197. And again, you can pay in installments if you need multiple installments or whatever, just totally let me know. But the course is going to go over 12 weeks. So it's a 6-module course. Normally you would maybe get through it in 6 weeks, but we're going to take our time, go really, really slow, give you lots of time for integration and practice and lots of time to really connect to the material. I'll be guiding, so I'll be teaching the module lesson live. So the first one is on January 6th, and then I'll be guiding the practice live too. The practices live is a big deal because all of the practices they're like embodied transmissions that I carry. So I'm gonna say that, but that's not like a science. That's definitely a woo thing. That's like a and how I want to explain that is like these are practices that I know in my cells, that I've practiced, that I've learned from someone who knows them in her cells. And so when I share them, I actually share them from a really, really powerful embodied place. So experiencing that live, it's like doing yoga with me live versus a video. It's great in the video, it's awesome, but practicing with me live is a whole different experience because it's like in the moment and it's like, it's me in that moment in time sharing the experience. I mean, what's beautiful is that live experience is going to be part of the course going forward, but I'll be sharing that live with you, the practice, and then we'll have a Q&A, which is not something that would ever be part of the course typically. So it's starting on the 6th, it runs for 12 weeks. We're taking it slow and sweet, and it's not very much money, $197 to join. And I think it's gonna be beautiful. So that is one way that you can actually connect to this work. And as I'm rewriting the modules, I'm weaving in the emotional regulation pieces and the new science that I've learned so that is baked into the course as well. Other ways that you can work with me is to work with me one-on-one. So that's more premium for sure. I do 3-month packages with my clients. So we have 3 Zoom calls a month, and then you take a week off, and we can explore this or other topics around sensuality, sexuality, around even how this all applies to running a business or whatever it is. And that is $3,000 for 3 months of support. There are also other coaches inside this group who do work around the same work, around emotions, and who may or may not also work with sexuality. So we have a ton. I think we have about 4 or 5, maybe I think it's 4 or 5 sex coaches who are trained, who are my colleagues who are inside this group. So they would have a lot of the same tools and materials that I do. And then I'm going to tag 2 specific coaches in the comments or in the replay. So if you're watching the replay, I'm going to just share a link to connect with 2 coaches, Lindsay McPherson and Laura Buckley, who do great work around emotional regulation. And I would highly recommend if you're looking, Lindsay does work with moms and Laura does more work around food. So definitely some great options for support if you're looking to get support of a coach and don't want to DIY this. So if this is like you're reading this, you're like, yeah, no, I definitely need to deal with this. There's ways that I can support you so that you can move forward, and 2021 can be the year where you get real with your emotions and learn to feel them and learn to feel more pleasure as a result. All right, so that is the end of the presentation. I'm going to come back, and if you have any questions, please feel free to pop your questions into the chat or into the Q&A box now. If you don't have questions, often the questions come later, so you can ask your questions in the replay. If you have questions now, though, you can, or if you don't have questions now, just put no in the chat so that I don't keep waiting if you don't have any questions. You're welcome. Thank you for coming, Marat. All right. Okay, cool. No questions. Awesome. I want you to kind of ruminate on this for a little while and sort of consider the material. It's complex. Like, it all like kind of weaves and works together, but it's big concepts. And I think like actually experiencing, like having this knowledge and now just being like, okay, like how am I experiencing these things in my life? Like, what is my relationship with seeking? What is my relationship with care? What is my relationship with fear? And just start to feel like, do I feel imbalance here? Or do I feel like I'm actually overactive in this? And maybe I need more of this. So just, and again, the tool of journaling is really powerful. And of course, we're going to be exploring all of this in Ignite Your Desire. So you're more than welcome to join us. And you will have, yes. Oh, that's what I didn't do, is the heart-to-heart hugs. Yeah. Marat, I didn't show my resources slide. So thank you for reminding me. And I just go back quickly and just show the resources slide so that you can write them down. So Nan Wise, Why Good Sex Matters is the book. Emily and Amelia Nagoski, Burnout is the must-read for all women everywhere book. If you have not read this, go buy it today and read it. It is a absolute game changer. My Brain was also a resource. And also what I learned studying with Layla Martin. There. Yeah, so I just ask questions if you have them. And I look forward to sharing more. Thank you for joining me live. And for those of you who are watching the replay, thank you for watching the replay. Please reach out and yeah, have a wonderful evening. I'm right on an hour. Awesome. Take care. Have a good night.